So right when my girlfriend Alice and I were about to get hitched, her first love, Henry, comes back to town. Henry got married to her cousin, but now he's back, widowed, with his kid. She's all soft for him again. She's always at his place, bringing food and fruit. If the kid has as much as a cold, she's the first to take him to the hospital. She calls him cousin-in-law, but who knows what she's really thinking. I see what's up but keep quiet. No one saw it coming when Henry's kid got in an accident and hurt his leg. I was at the scene doing triage like you're supposed to, and sent another kid with a head injury first in the ambulance. Henry cried. Sam could have had help sooner. I begged him to let us go first. He doesn't like me, fine, but why should he take it out on Sam? Alice looked at me like I was the worst, with hurt, disdain, and anger. After what felt like forever, I finally came out of the OR, tired, and told the family Sam's stable. Henry sobbed somewhere nearby. Henry's my girlfriend Alice's cousin-in-law. His son Sam's preschool had an accident today. I went with the ambulance and found Sam's leg crushed, bleeding bad. When the last of the first ambulances arrived, Henry begged me to put Sam on board. But there was this other kid with a critical head injury, so I sent them first. Another ambulance got there 5 minutes later. Now Sam's surgery was done, and they wheeled him out. The other kid's family kept thanking me, while Alice gave me this hard look. The whole thing was painfully ironic. I went over to check on Sam. Sam's injury was serious, and the ambulance delay meant he lost a leg. Turns out, the ambulance hit some traffic on the way. Henry wouldn't even look at me, just cried to Alice. Sam loved running and jumping, and now he's lost a leg. How will he ever be the same? He said, Calvin could have saved him. I pleaded with him. Sure, he doesn't like me, but why make Sam suffer? That hit me hard. It's true, I'm not crazy about Henry, but I'd never target a kid. I explained we follow emergency principles. The critical cases go first. That other kid barely made it. I felt awful for Sam, he's a sweet kid. But in the same situation, I'd do it again. I looked at Alice, hoping she'd back me up. She finally said, I trust Calvin made the right call. Henry paused, tearing up again. Alice, he's your boyfriend. It makes sense you'd stand by him. Sam got a tough break. Lost his mom, now this. Jenny died abroad, and that's when Henry brought Sam back. Alice looked down, apologetic. That's not what I meant. She glanced at me, then softly told Henry, I'm sorry for Calvin. I froze, heart sinking. She didn't have me say sorry, but it felt just as bad. I wasn't sure what I was even supposed to apologize for, but I did know she sided with him over me again. Henry's always been between me and Alice. Back in the day, both Jenny and Alice liked him, which is why I left for med school far away. When Henry returned, the family ties and shared history meant Alice would do anything for him and Sam. Even now, if we're together and Henry calls, she's out the door, expecting me to understand. I can't say if it's just family duty she feels, or if something's still there for him. After I handed off my duties, I went to see Sam. The door was ajar, and I overheard voices. The room was full. Everyone was upset over what happened. Sam was waking up, and while still groggy from anesthesia, just asked, Did Uncle Calvin save my friend Xiaolong? Henry's eyes welled up, voice cracking. He did. He said, Don't blame Uncle Calvin for not saving you. Alice's uncle cut in, What's that mean? Calvin didn't save Sam? Henry glossed over how I prioritized another kid and Sam didn't get to the hospital quick enough. Alice just looked at him, didn't say a thing. The aunt got upset and her voice shook. Why didn't Calvin save Sam first? She gave Alice and her parents a sharp look. Alice's folks hesitated, then seemed embarrassed and started to scold Alice. Alice, Calvin was wrong. Talk some sense into him. He shouldn't side with outsiders. Alice tried to explain, doctors go by who's in danger, not who they know. Calvin was just doing his job. But the aunt snapped back, I don't care about that. My grandson could have been okay. Alice's family isn't usually unreasonable. But Sam's all they have left of Jenny. Even if deep down they know I wasn't wrong, the heartache gets the best of them. Henry jumped in, saying Calvin has no parents, so I guess he's not as attached to family. That made Alice's parents look even more upset. I looked down, trying to figure out what to do. Sam's grandparents rushed over as well. They came hurrying through the hospital room door and saw me right away. I had to push down the feelings of discomfort and step inside. All eyes on me felt like a spotlight, but I had to explain myself. Everyone felt so bad for Sam. But at that moment, I had to make a tough call. I had to send the more severely injured patient to the hospital first. Sam's uncle was upset. He was like, "But you're Sam's future uncle." Yet first and foremost, I'm a doctor. I guess I'm not great at dealing with situations. Always seems like I make things worse. Alice pulled me aside and wasn't exactly thrilled. "Do you really think they want an explanation right now? It's pointless." I knew deep down she was right, but I also felt like I needed to make my stance clear. Alice was tired, rubbing her head. "I'll deal with them. Let's get you back to your dorm." I was staying at the on-site hospital dorms, convenient for work. I glanced at the closed hospital room door, knew it was time to go, and nodded in agreement. The next day, the hospital got a complaint about me. It was from Henry's mom. She thought my actions caused her son to lose a limb. Nobody overreacted at the time, but it didn't mean they weren't upset with me. I went and gave my account of things, described how both patients were at that moment. With the ambulance footage and what other staff said, it was clear my judgment was on point. This complaint didn't drag out. I handed in a report and it was wrapped up in 2 days. Even if Henry's mom wasn't happy, there wasn't much she could do. Alice really cares for Sam. During his month in the hospital, she'd visit daily. When his wounds hurt, she'd hold him gently until he calmed down. When I showed up, Henry was there too, watching them quietly with such warmth. They looked just like a family. It reminded me of a family dinner the night Henry came back home. I was there too. Alice couldn't take her eyes off him that evening. It was like watching the two moments overlap in time and space in my head. I cleared my head and entered the room. Henry's face shifted when he saw me, a bit of impatience there, but he hid it quickly. I asked if they'd sorted out the discharge paperwork. Alice finally put Sam down and went to handle it. Henry silently packed up clothes. Sam said he was thirsty, so Henry left to get some water, leaving me alone with Sam. Once his dad was out, Sam tugged on my hand and whispered, "Uncle Calvin, don't be mad at my dad. He's just really sad." Even at his age, kids pick up on adult emotions. He noticed his dad being cold to me. I gently asked, "Are you upset with me, Sam?" He shook his head, "Losing a leg, yeah, it's sad. But losing my friend Dragon would have been worse. The doctor said with a prosthesis, I'll walk again soon. It's all right." My heart ached hearing this. It hadn't been easy for me, not one bit. Misunderstood, feeling distant, judged morally. It's been hard. Alice felt guilty about Henry and Sam and tried to make it right. That was her way of offering me out, though it felt more like an accusation at times. Rationally, she took my side, but emotionally, she was elsewhere. I made my case and didn't want the same argument over and over, like a loop of defending myself. So I let it go. Didn't expect comfort to come from a 5-year-old. I pulled out a couple of chocolates for Sam and thanked him. Sam just took them when his dad's voice scolded. "Sam, didn't I say to eat less sweets?" Henry took the chocolates and had him drink water instead. When we left, I noticed the chocolates in the trash. After Sam left the hospital, Henry called Alice more often. Sometimes Sam was upset with phantom pains, sometimes it was checkups, other times he just wanted Alice. With work, their time alone was rare. Now it was mostly about Sam. I felt torn. Wanted time just for us, but wondered if I was being too petty. On the anniversary of Susan's passing, Alice planned to join me at her memorial. I grew up with Susan. She was family. She was an amazing doctor, devoted her life to healing. 2 years ago, she got trapped in rubble during an earthquake, put others first, even Alice, to safety, but didn't make it out herself. The day was dreary, drizzling all morning. My mood matched the weather. I waited for Alice, lost in thought. When Alice called, I thought she had arrived, but she sounded apologetic. "Calvin, Sam's acting up at home. His leg's hurting again. Mind if we do this another day?" Hearing that, my patience wore thin. "I need you here," I said, perhaps a bit coldly. Alice was silent for a moment, maybe startled by my tone. I pressed on. "Henry's his dad. Sam needs him most." But Alice reasoned, "Henry's gentle, Sam gets fussy. I know Henry's a big shot in the corporate world. He's not as weak as you think." I didn't say it earlier because relationships need flexibility. I didn't want to argue over everything. But today was different. Alas, my stubbornness didn't get me far. "She seemed in a hurry," said she'd explain later, and hung up. I stood there, stunned for a few moments, then headed out alone. Standing under the umbrella in front of Susan's tombstone for a long time, I didn't leave until it got dark. When I got back, I was chilled and damp, so I quickly took a hot shower. As I stepped out, the door opened. Alice came over. She had calmed Sam down, so she thought of me. She walked up to me and raised her hand as if to ruffle my slightly wet hair, but I subtly avoided it. Alice lowered her eyes and apologized. "Calvin, I was the one who broke our plans first. I'm sorry, but today was really special." I didn't show much emotion, poured myself a cup of warm water, and said with a steady voice, "Yeah, today was special. I figured you knew that." She froze up, momentarily at a loss for words. "I just felt that paying respects could happen anytime. You have to prioritize what's more urgent," she said. I paused mid-sip. The warmth from the cup was turning my cool fingertips red. Neither Alice nor I are emotional types. We both think a lot and don't like arguments, so we never fight. I set down the cup and walked to the door. Holding my emotions in check, I said to her, "I'm tired and want to rest. You should go." Alice stayed quiet and looked at me for a moment, then walked away. She doesn't cling. When we have differences, she gives space for things to cool down. Sometimes I wonder if it's just her personality or if she doesn't love me enough. If she can just walk away without worrying about how upset I am at that moment. During those cool-down phases, Alice doesn't disappear. She'll remind me of the weather, mention meals, say goodnight, but she never softens her tone to soothe. And she doesn't react when I don't reply. Sometimes genuine, sometimes detached. Until her parents asked her to bring me home for dinner. I couldn't say no to them. Sam's wound is healing well. They can start planning for a prosthetic. Her parents were more at ease with me now. At dinner, they brought up our marriage, saying we should finalize things. Her mom laid out their condition. "Calvin, you need to quit your hospital job before you marry." Surprised, I glanced at Alice. She seemed taken aback too, not expecting her mother to bring this up. "Your job is demanding." I couldn't say much when you were dating, but marriage means focusing on the family. That's not too much to ask, right? I put down my chopsticks, trying to choose my words carefully. I hadn't planned on giving up my job, I started, but her mother cut me off, visibly displeased. "That's non-negotiable. Quitting is the condition for marriage. Otherwise, forget it. Alice can support you, let her handle the career." I frowned, about to explain when Alice spoke first, taking my hand. "Mom, let me talk to Calvin." She led me to a room. With a furrowed brow, she said, "Didn't you see how upset my mom got? Fighting this is pointless." "Pointless," I echoed. "And what, in your mind, is worth it?" Alice is a top lawyer, and in her logical mindset, everything serves the end goal. She doesn't waste time on ineffective actions. This dinner is about setting the wedding date. Just agree to her terms. She didn't think was unreasonable. It's just a hard job with little pay. No need to cling to being a doctor. You don't have to argue with my mom. Her belittling attitude stuck with me. I had to reevaluate our relationship. There's always been a gap between us. Not because I'm too slow, but because she's too smart. Everything came easily to her, while I had to work hard for my achievements, which seemed trivial to her. Her standards are high, and I rarely receive her approval. Being a doctor means long hours, frequent overtime, and responding to emergencies at any moment. And my salary is a drop in the ocean compared to her earnings. She has the pride to dismiss my work easily. Yet I had told her why I became a doctor. Growing up around Susan, I saw the suffering of patients and the miracle of new life. I wanted to be like her, dedicated to healing and saving lives. This belief allowed me to handle intense academics and a busy hospital. For me, it's not just a job. Looking at Alice then felt like seeing a stranger. Before we dated, I told you my job would be demanding, and you said you'd respect that. Alice held my shoulders earnestly. I can accept your busy life, but these are my parents' demands. Can't you compromise just once for me? I was momentarily speechless. I had compromised many times before. I thought even if Alice couldn't fully understand my values, she wouldn't oppose them. She explained, my parents raised me. I can't disregard their feelings. She feels indebted to her parents, so she's mindful of them. She owes Henry and Sam too, so she cares for them. But she owes me nothing. When it always comes down to two choices, I'm never picked. In her list of responsibilities, I'm last. Alice looked serious. Calvin, you need to understand. Being with me means accepting my burdens. I grew quiet, steadily gazing at her. We've been together for 2 years. But my love for her lasted more than that. I genuinely wanted to live our lives together. Yet now I hesitated. I didn't know being with you would mean constantly giving up parts of myself. Like there's no end. I loved her, but I couldn't lose myself entirely in the love. After a tense silence, I looked away and told her, then let's just end this before turning around and leaving. As she caught up, she heard me speak, my voice firm yet gentle. I'm sorry. I won't be staying to finish dinner. And I won't be getting married. As I turned and walked away, I vaguely heard Aunt's discontented voice in the distance. I've got pretty sharp hearing, and she was questioning Alice. What kind of attitude is Calvin showing? If he's just your regular friend, we wouldn't mind, but as your boyfriend? Does he really think we're okay with him being an orphan with no family? You've got better prospects than Jenny, and she still managed to marry Henry, with his high position and salary, while juggling family well. You can do better. Mom, stop it, Alice said, a bit helpless. Susan saved my life, so I promised I'd take good care of Calvin for her. I upset Calvin. He was just saying things in anger earlier. I paused, my face going a bit pale. Aunt had never really treated me poorly before. I didn't expect them to think like this. Maybe it was because of Susan that they reluctantly accepted me. Back then, lost in sadness, I forgot to question Alice's true motives for wanting to be with me. What I thought was love growing over time was just gratitude in disguise. I lost the urge to go back and question them, so I ran off. On my way back to the hospital, I saw 2 kids squatting on the ground, eagerly watching some bugs. I spaced out a little, thinking about Alice and I when we were kids. She was the first person who didn't think I was weird and wanted to be around me. I was a quiet kid who liked examining dead insects, and none of my peers wanted to hang out with me. I'd often be alone in a corner looking at bugs, and one day Alice came by with a book, stopped for a bit, and smiled, saying, "Your interest is really unique." We were neighbors back then, without much interaction, but I knew she was a top student. She didn't give me weird looks, accepted my hobbies, and even tutored me. Because of her, I also got to know Jenny, who was outgoing and gentle, and my life became a bit more vibrant. Then Henry moved in. Unlike me, he had a warm smile and a sharp mind. Slowly, he became the one walking between Jenny and Alice, and I trailed behind quietly while they discussed topics I couldn't quite grasp. They seemed to belong to the same group. Sometimes Alice would look back for me, but Henry would quickly capture her attention again. It wasn't until I felt a sense of loss and bitterness that I realized my feelings for her had changed. But those teenage feelings were squashed when she said she liked Henry. I went to study in the South and didn't see her for 8 years. When we reunited, those buried feelings resurfaced. I knew I wasn't exactly what Alice was looking for in a partner. But when I volunteered in epidemic zones or disaster areas, she'd worry and lose her usual composure. She would have moments of believing in me and speaking up for me. I thought that was love, just not as deep as mine for her. But apparently I had it wrong all along. I stopped in my tracks and broke down, crying softly after a few seconds. Maybe Alice thought I'd eventually give in, like I usually did, so she waited for me to change my mind. She kept her cool as usual and went on a trip. In the end, I sent the ring back to her. When Sam came to the hospital again, I found him sitting alone in a wheelchair, looking a bit down with no sign of Henry. I hesitated about going over to talk to him, but then he looked up and his eyes lit up. I walked over. Sam, why are you here all by yourself? Dad went to the restroom. He told me to wait here for him. Sam paused, then nervously asked, Uncle Calvin, did you and Auntie break up? Is it because I always bothered Auntie and you didn't like it? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be a bother. I also don't get why Dad keeps telling me to ask to see Auntie. I like you and Auntie together. But Dad got mad at me yesterday and said, don't you want to call Auntie Mom? I thought that was strange. Auntie is Auntie. How can she be Mom? I frowned, finding it odd. Sam was usually a well-mannered, smart kid. Why the sudden clinginess? Uncle Calvin? Sam's voice brought me back. I ruffled his hair and said gently, it's not your fault, Sam. I have to get back to work now, so I can't stay. Be good and wait here for your dad. Alice came looking for me as soon as her trip ended. By then, it had been a month since we last spoke. I changed the lock, so her key didn't work. She stood out there, clutching the ring box tightly. She was trying hard to keep her emotions in check. Why did you return the ring? I replied, we broke up. It's not right for me to keep it. Alice's brows nodded. I didn't agree to break up. This isn't some childish game. We were planning to get married. Don't let a small thing get between us. This time apart has been a cooling off period for me. She stubbornly pushed the ring box back into my hand. I looked at it, then tossed it back at her. It hit her chest, fell to the ground, and rolled to her feet. I don't want it. Calvin. Alice's face was tense. Don't do this. I'm not being dramatic, I said, trying to keep it together. Thanks for giving me a cooling off period. It gave me time to really think about our issues. If you'd come to me sooner, I might have just forgiven you again. Alice's tone shifted. What issues? Is it about quitting my job? I don't think that's a reason to break up. Why didn't you do it earlier then? I interrupted. Because you always wait for me to compromise. Alice looked surprised and went quiet. You always bent for us? I always gave in, didn't I? I said with a slight laugh, feeling warmth in my eyes. Realizing that trying to understand doesn't earn you appreciation. Only expectation. I love you, so I was willing to bend. But that doesn't mean I should always have to. I looked at her confused. Is breaking up really such a bad thing for you? You don't have to marry someone you're obligated to, someone you don't love. I heard what you and Aunt said that day. The person who saved you is Susan. If you want to repay her, you don't need to involve me. I don't think Susan's wish would be for me to marry someone I don't love. I'm not the ideal daughter-in-law in your mom's eyes either. You can find someone better. Alice froze for a second, feeling a bit of anxiety, but she pushed it down and steadied her voice. That's not it. My parents would accept you. It's not just about responsibility. I didn't budge. Your parents hold a grudge that's like a thorn. They might bury it, but they won't remove it. Someday, if I don't measure up, that thorn will just resurface. Like when I irritated them by saying I wouldn't marry, or how I couldn't save Sam. And as for you being with me for reasons beyond responsibility, I paused. Then how deep are your feelings for me? Have you really noticed my efforts or my growth? Why do you belittle my work? When you care about Henry's and your family's feelings, why not mine? Is a boyfriend supposed to endure all the grievances? Hearing my series of questions, Alice seemed lost for a moment. Even her usually quick mind failed to come up with a response. In her daze, her phone rang. It was Henry. She hesitated, glancing at me. She came to say we weren't breaking up, yet she couldn't bring herself to ignore another man's call at this moment. There really is a lot of imbalance between us. Imbalanced emotions, imbalanced effort, imbalanced status. Liking her is actually quite a sad thing. Alice's feelings for me are shallow, so it's only natural that I come after many others in her life. But for me, after Susan's death, she became the most important person to me. Compared like this, it really isn't fair. Yet Alice still hesitated, almost expecting me to kindly let her handle Henry's issue first. Sometimes, you can't break off a relationship because you've not been disappointed enough. Your affection still outweighs your letdowns. But everyone wakes up at some point when they're thoroughly disheartened. I looked away and took a step back, planning to shut the door, but she quickly blocked it with her hand. Calvin, go to Henry, I said coldly. There's no need to struggle. You two seem perfect for each other now. Alice quickly explained, I'm just worried something happened to Sam. Anger flared up in me, and I couldn't help but yell. You really can't tell that his dependence on you has gone too far? Why is it so hard to admit you still have feelings? Alice, Henry is good at keeping things appropriate with the dual roles of old friend and family. His gentle demeanor makes any criticism seem oversensitive and petty. But can Alice really not see how improper this relationship is? No way. In everything else, she's thorough and precise. Yet when it comes to handling this uncontrollable emotional mess, she's terrible. Your knee-jerk reaction is your truest choice. When Henry shows up, I lose. But I still use lofty reasons to deceive myself. She may not cross the line, but she also doesn't stop him from doing so. I'm tired of these endless entanglements. So, I continued trying to close the door. She was strong, and even using all my strength, the door remained stuck halfway. Alice gave me a complicated look. How can we not break up? Tell me what you want. She still didn't get it. I'm not someone who casually mentions breakups. I would even swallow pride and compromise for the sake of our relationship. If I say I want to break up, it means I've lost hope and won't place demands on you anymore. We're divided by principles, parental biases, and Henry, the shining white moonlight. I'm worn out. Alice, I said hoarsely, I won't love you anymore. As I continued trying to shut the door, my whole body was trembling from exertion, biting my lip. Looking up at her, tears stubbornly pooled in my eyes but didn't fall. Yet the resolve to let her go was clear. Alice seemed pained by my bloodshot eyes. In that moment, her face turned pale, and she let go. Though heartbroken, life goes on, and work still needs to be done. Henry texting me to meet up was unexpected. Staring at the message for a few seconds, then I turned off my phone, picked up my materials, and headed into a meeting. I got so busy I forgot about it. Until days later, she messaged me again, and I remembered, blocking her on a whim. Maybe not used to being treated this way, Henry looked displeased when he came to see me. We talked at a dessert shop across from the hospital. Calvin, what's the point of holding on to someone who doesn't love you? Do you really think asking her to keep boundaries would hide her feelings for me? In his short statement, I picked up on one key point and calmly asked, so she's ignoring you? Henry paused, but then quickly regained his composure and confidence. Alice would never ignore me. Even though recently, when contacting Alice, she'd have others handle things, it still proved she couldn't let go of herself. It was clear to him that such avoidance was just a product of my unreasonable request. Calvin, you should know Alice liked me before. We were both stubborn, only acting on our own plans, unwilling to compromise for each other. She didn't want to go abroad with me, so I could only choose my accommodating sister, Jenny. But people change. She and I could work things out. You know how she treats me and how her parents like me, so why force it? I chuckled, so what you're saying is you want to be with Alice? Well, shouldn't you go tell him how you feel? Why come to me? You're not planning to be with me anyway. But if you were really so confident, I doubt you would come here just to try and convince me to back off. I stopped smiling. Henry, first of all, Alice and I broke up. What's going on between you and her has nothing to do with me, so you shouldn't bother me with it. Secondly, let me remind you, Alice's parents like you because you aren't her partner. If you were to go to them and say you want to be their son-in-law, things might change. Henry being 3 years older than Alice isn't a huge deal. The real issue is that he's currently Alice's brother-in-law. Her parents aren't exactly open-minded. Deep down, they're pretty conservative. I'm pretty sure if Henry and Alice got together, if they see me as a thorn in their side, they'd see Henry as a whole mountain. Henry looked stunned. His expression shifted. Calvin, I'm not like you. I have better qualities than you, and I'm better suited for Alice. I shrugged. Anything else? If not, I glanced at the hospital across the street, my breaks almost over. I noticed an elderly person slowly walking towards the hospital entrance. Even though they were moving slowly, they seemed unsteady and uncomfortable. Sensing something was wrong, Sure enough, the next second they collapsed at the entrance. I immediately got up and ran over. "Calvin!" Henry yelled, frustrated. "I'm not done talking." As I arrived, the security guard was already checking the situation. The person was turned over to lie flat, and Henry cried out, "Mom!" She panicked, grabbing my arm for help. "Calvin, please check on my mom." Pushing her hand away, I checked the situation. The woman was unconscious with no pulse when I checked her carotid artery, and she had stopped breathing. Henry kept asking what was happening. Without a word, I started CPR immediately. After about 4 minutes of emergency treatment, she regained consciousness. The medical staff then transferred her to the hospital for further treatment. Henry's mom was saved, but she suffered fractures to 6 ribs and needed a week in the hospital. After I explained this, Henry's big brother questioned why his mom had rib fractures. He couldn't understand why it happened. I patiently explained, typically during effective CPR, the compression rate should be at least 100 times per minute, with a depth of at least 2 inches for adults. Rib fractures can be a common complication. Additionally, the patient has osteoporosis, and fractures can occur during CPR. I was cut off by his angry retort. "So you're saying you caused my mom's rib injuries? Calling it a complication is just an excuse for your mistake." Alice was there too. She frowned and approached, trying to explain, "Trust the medical professionals. From what I've read, this kind of situation can indeed occur." Henry's father added, "Even if that's possible, it doesn't mean she did everything right. Last time, she ignored Sam, so who knows if she has a problem with us." Henry, who witnessed the entire CPR, stood there silent, just observing coldly. I just found the whole thing absurd. Before I could explain, I got a notification. Multiple casualties from a car accident were being rushed to the hospital for treatment. "If you have doubts, we'll deal with this later," I said and hurried off to prepare for the incoming patients. The work kept me busy until the early morning. Even though I had short breaks between surgeries, the back-to-back operations were exhausting. Rubbing my neck, I walked out, my scrubs stained with dried blood. Alice met me, and I blurted out in surprise, "Why are you still here?" She looked at me with a glimmer in her eyes. "I wanted to wait for you." I looked at the patients being wheeled into the surgery room. "Did they all make it?" I nodded. Yes, they made it. The critically injured were prioritized, and the others weren't in life-threatening condition. "Now it's all manageable." She smiled, tears welling up. "I used to just think you were dedicated to your job, and I'd politely put up with how busy you were. But seeing you calmly treating patients while racing against time out there made me see things differently. Watching you left me in awe." She continued, "I realized the boy who once bandaged my wounds clumsily has grown into something remarkable. Calvin, you were right, I never really saw you for who you were. During those 10 hours, I saw families go from anxiety to relief, and from despair to rebirth. I finally understood the meaning behind your hard work." Alice regretted not acknowledging the boy in front of her sooner. He's not afraid of hardship, dedicated and focused on doing what he loves. In this field, he's the real professional. Who am I to judge his work's value with my limited perspective? She wished she'd hugged him during those moments he shared his joy after long shifts, instead of questioning if the effort matched the reward. "Calvin," she said, smoothing my hair, unsure if it was too late. "I'm so proud of you." I looked up at her, a little surprised. I never expected to get the acknowledgement I wanted, albeit late, after we broke up. It wasn't joyous, just bittersweet. Already exhausted, I didn't really feel like talking. I just wanted to get some sleep as soon as possible. As I changed and headed back to my dorm, Alice handed me a warm snack. I thought she'd say, "Let's talk," but instead, she simply told me to eat up and rest, then left. Henry's family asked me to pay for his mom's medical bills, emotional distress, nutrition fees, and other costs. I found it absurd and refused. Soon after, I got a subpoena from the court. They claimed I mishandled the situation and acted with personal bias, which led to the patient's rib fractures during the emergency treatment. The personal bias supposedly came from an old complaint Henry's mom had filed against me with the hospital, which is on record. Alice heard about what was going on and came to see me. I had already talked to Henry, but he said his dad and brothers insisted on finding the truth, and he couldn't persuade them otherwise. I laughed sarcastically. Alice didn't know that Henry had already approached me once with a message. He said, "You leave here and stay away from Alice, and I'll convince them to drop the lawsuit." Henry didn't bother coming himself. He just had to say the word for someone else to come hassle me. I asked, "Are you here to tell me to give in like last time when you apologized to Henry on my behalf over Sam?" Alice was silent for a few seconds but then said no. "If I just wanted to solve the problem, I could have quietly paid the compensation. But I know that would insult your professionalism as a doctor, and you'd probably end up hating me." I was a bit surprised and looked at her. "I'll keep talking to Henry's dad and try to avoid a court case." She continued, "Last time you got complained against, you didn't tell me. Was it because you were disappointed in me?" I shook my head. "Just didn't want to make things hard for you. It wasn't a big deal to handle." Alice lowered her gaze, staying quiet. I looked at the sky and suddenly remembered something from long ago. "You remember when I helped a pregnant woman who got hit by a car, and the driver fled? Back then, you warned me that the area didn't have anything to document the scene, and I could have been framed if I wasn't careful." Alice clearly remembered. "But you told me then, saving lives is a doctor's instinct. Every second after an accident counts as golden time for first aid. There's no room for second thoughts." I nodded. "Yeah, but now that it's really happening, do you think I should have listened?" Alice looked at me seriously. She didn't try to reason with me like usual, but instead comforted me. "Honestly, right or wrong doesn't matter. We have different roles and considerations. Besides, this time there's evidence. The place where she fainted was at the hospital entrance with security cameras. CPR guidelines are clear. Even though personal grudges are a blurry area, don't worry too much. If discussions don't work, we'll find another way." She didn't want to use the power of social media unless necessary. A peaceful resolution was best. "But if it can't be helped, I'll help you fight this case. Do what you feel is right. I'll handle the rest." Felt like a full-on commitment. I tilted my head, looking at her anew. "You've changed a bit." Alice smiled, but it was a bit bittersweet. She finally realized changes were needed, though it cost her losing him. Things didn't end up going badly. Not sure how Alice talked to them, but they dropped the lawsuit soon after. I felt I owed her a dinner to say thanks. When I invited her, Alice asked if we could set aside a day for her to plan. I was curious but agreed. On our day off, I showed up to discover she wanted to fulfill promises left unkept. I'm kinda old-fashioned, a sucker for nostalgia. I enjoy walking familiar paths with her, seeing time and places change while people stay the same. I also loved recommending picturesque restaurants for us to try. It wasn't hard to do, but we rarely did it. Sometimes work got in the way, other times it was Henry's calls, and eventually I just stopped asking. So, when she took me to familiar places from memory, I understood her intention. We had dinner at a new open-air restaurant, overlooking a man-made lake and distant hills where the sun set. Seeing so many skyscrapers and bustling streets, this peaceful view felt incredibly relaxing. In this rare, tranquil moment, I savored the breeze, closing my eyes in comfort. Time is short and we didn't cover much today. We can catch up later. Alice looked at me with her dark eyes, softly asking, "Is that okay?" I gazed at the fiery sunset in silence. She continued, "I read once that people find love through the pain of separation. You might think I'm foolish, that I needed you to be utterly disappointed and leave before realizing how deeply I care for you. The night you wouldn't take back the ring, I kept replaying your words, realizing how unfit I was as your girlfriend. I admit, when Henry returned, I wasn't unaffected. I kept helping him not just because of our family ties, but maybe out of some lingering childhood emotion. I always thought I was pretty clear-headed. I didn't intentionally cross any lines. If I had a valid reason to help, I thought I wasn't doing anything wrong. I relied on your affection for me, thinking you wouldn't give up on me, and I kept asking for your understanding. But I'm really sure now, I have no other feelings for Henry. He'll only ever be like a brother to me. I shouldn't have downplayed your efforts and achievements. Growing up, I've heard so many compliments that I'm numb to them. I didn't think they had any real positive impact on me, so I just kept going at my own pace with studying and working. I ignored how much you hoped for some positive affirmation from me. Calvin, I will change these things. I'll respect your work and cherish our relationship equally. I didn't rush to get back together because I wanted you to see my changes first. Can we start over? I listened to her seriously as she finished speaking. If I'd heard this sooner, maybe things would have been different. Alice, I didn't always intend to never give up on you and never leave you. When I went south for med school at 18, I kinda gave up on you. I knew you liked Henry. Alice's eyes widened a bit. She didn't know I liked her back then. She thought I only got feelings for her when we reconnected. So when I felt there was no chance for us, I let go. I won't deny I was happy when we were together. I won't erase those good times. But I also questioned myself, felt wronged, and really became humble in this relationship. With you, I evaluated myself by your standards, by your parents' standards, and even couldn't help comparing myself to Henry. Without being Alice's boyfriend, I just had to be myself according to my own standards. It was a lot lighter and actually kinda nice. I see your changes and get your intentions, but it's a shame. When I loved you, your feelings weren't that deep for me. When you finally learned to love me, I was already over it. Our love had a time lag. When it's over, it's over. Liking someone and being suited for someone are two different things. Let's both move forward, okay? But Alice is a persistent person. Calvin, I don't want to give up and I won't. Before, our feelings weren't equal. You were more deeply involved. I wasn't. Now it's switched. It's my turn to wait, which seems fair. After a moment of silence, I confessed, I've been given an opportunity to study abroad from the hospital. You don't have to tie yourself down because I won't either. Aside from thanking you, this meal is sorta a farewell too. On the day I left, Alice somehow found out I was heading to the airport. She called, asking urgently for me to wait, not to try to stop me, but just to see me one last time. But we've already said our goodbyes. Meeting again would just bring unnecessary strings. Once at the airport, I went straight to check in and then lined up for security. Just as I got my documents back from the staff, I heard a familiar voice calling my name over and over. Alice was searching for me, slightly out of breath, with none of her usual composure. I paused for a moment, tightened my grip on my suitcase handle. But in the end, I didn't turn around and continued towards security, drifting further from Alice through the crowd. Just like I said, Alice, let's both move forward. Old stories ending is the norm, but the new life is just beginning. Alice's epilogue. For a long time, I kinda refused to accept that Calvin really left me. So I didn't tell my family about our breakup. Calvin, first impression-wise, seemed quiet and ordinary. Didn't have a very strong presence. It was his interests that I found intriguing, which led to us gradually getting closer. When he went off to college, we lost touch, and over time, I nearly forgot about him. Years later, when we met again, he'd graduated as a doctor. We reconnected. Before all this, I'd never thought about being with him one day. But when Susan had her accident, I saw him quietly crying by her grave, feeling guilty and a bit heartbroken. I wasn't oblivious to his feelings for me, and we'd known each other since we were kids, so I thought, why not? I asked if he wanted to be my boyfriend, that I'd take care of him. And we naturally got together. Calvin isn't like Henry, who's good with people and easily charms the elders. Calvin mostly cared silently, like making sure everyone was healthy, doing checkups, buying vitamins. He was more of a gentle presence. Over time, feelings grew, and we got closer to discussing marriage. Until Henry came back. Gradually, without realizing, Calvin and I drifted apart. I was used to Calvin's understanding, so I left him over and over to help Henry. Even when I knew Henry didn't really need my help, I still indulged his reliance and my own selfishness. I thought I was someone who knew their boundaries, but now I see, I was so reckless. I ended up not respecting his dedication to his work, slowly wearing away his expectations and love for me. When Calvin said he wanted to break up, I thought it was just an angry reaction. Only when he returned the ring did I feel a bit of uncontrolled panic. In my 30 years, rarely did anyone point out my mistakes. But after Calvin left, I started to reflect on my issues. The day Henry's mother had her accident, I stayed in the hospital for a long time. I saw for the first time what Calvin was like at work. Serious, focused, calm, decisive, responsible. I nearly clipped the wings of this brilliant Calvin. Thank goodness he stuck to his beliefs. After finding out he got a court summons, I wanted to do something for him. While persuading Henry's family, he found me. He persistently asked why I was doing so much for Calvin. I understood his meaning, so I answered, because he's who I love. Sadly, by the time I learned to love him, he was learning to unlove me. I even slowly realized he'd loved me for a long, long time. Calvin went abroad to further his studies, and I didn't even get to see him one last time. That night, I got really drunk, calling out his name in a haze. My parents, disapprovingly, nagged me to let go of Calvin, saying I deserved better. Lying in bed, I covered my eyes with my arm, but couldn't stop the tears. With a hoarse voice, I yelled, out of control, "It's not that I don't want him. He doesn't want me. He really doesn't want me anymore. Someone as good as Calvin, anyone will be happy with him. But I might never find anyone as understanding and loving as he was to me again. I regret it, regret such a wasted chance of love. But regret is the most useless thing in the world.